My sister-in-law mixed an allergy drug into my food, which caused a severe reaction all over my body. Later, she and my mother-in-law stormed into my hospital room and warned, "If you tell the police, you'll regret it." When I vowed to call the police, my mother-in-law clenched both fists and punched me hard in the stomach. Father-in-law added, "Some people just need to learn about family loyalty." But my husband walked in and saw everything. The revenge he took destroyed their world completely. My name is Elena, and what happened to me at a family dinner changed everything I believed about the people who were supposed to love me. It started 3 months ago at what should have been an ordinary Sunday gathering at my in-laws' house in suburban Connecticut. My husband Daniel and I had been married for 2 years, and these weekly dinners were mandatory according to his mother, Patricia. Missing one meant weeks of passive-aggressive comments and cold shoulders. Daniel's sister, Vanessa, had always treated me like an intruder. From the moment Daniel introduced us, she made it clear that no woman would ever be good enough for her precious baby brother. She was 34, unmarried, and seemingly devoted to making my existence miserable. Patricia enabled every bit of it, often laughing at Vanessa's jokes about my cooking, my career as a graphic designer, or my inability to give them grandchildren yet. That particular Sunday, I'd been feeling off all day. Nothing major, just a general sense of unease that I attributed to the usual stress of dealing with my in-laws. Daniel had been called into work for an emergency at his architecture firm, so he'd be joining us late. I almost used that as an excuse to cancel, but I knew Patricia would never let me hear the end of it. The house smelled like Patricia's famous pot roast when I arrived. Vanessa answered the door with that tight-lipped smile she reserved especially for me. "Elena," she said, drawing out my name like it tasted bad. "Come in. Mother's been waiting." Patricia greeted me in the kitchen with her standard air kiss, barely making contact with my cheeks. "Daniel's not with you?" "He got held up at work. He'll be here in about an hour." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "How convenient." I helped set the table while Vanessa and Patricia finished preparing dinner. Daniel's father, Robert, sat in his recliner watching a football game, barely acknowledging my presence with a grunt. The family dynamic had always been crystal clear. Robert checked out decades ago, leaving Patricia to rule the household with Vanessa as her loyal second-in-command. Dinner was served promptly at 6. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, and Patricia's special salad that she claimed used a secret family dressing. I'd always found it too sweet, but tonight she'd made a point of serving me an extra-large portion. "I made the dressing especially for you," Patricia announced, her eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Vanessa helped. We thought you might appreciate the extra effort." Something in her tone felt wrong, but I smiled and thanked her anyway. Years of dealing with their subtle hostility had taught me to pick my battles. I took a bite of the salad. The dressing was different from usual, with a slightly bitter aftertaste hidden under the excessive sweetness. I ate mechanically, forcing conversation about work and the weather while Vanessa kept glancing at me with barely concealed anticipation. 15 minutes after I finished the salad, my throat began to itch. At first, I tried to ignore it, reaching for my water glass repeatedly. But the itching spread, crawling across my neck and down my arms. My skin felt like it was on fire from the inside. "Are you all right?" Robert asked, finally looking up from his plate. "You're turning red." I touched my face and felt the heat radiating from my skin. Looking down at my arms, I saw angry welts rising across my flesh. Panic flooded through me as my throat began to tighten. "I can't breathe properly," I gasped, standing up so fast my chair toppled backward. Patricia's face remained eerily calm. "You're probably just having a hot flash. Sit down." But I couldn't sit down. The welts were spreading rapidly, and each breath became harder than the last. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy and swollen. "I need to call 911, I wheezed. Vanessa moved faster than I'd ever seen her move, snatching the phone from my hands. "Don't be so dramatic. You're embarrassing yourself." My vision started to blur at the edges. I staggered toward the door, desperate to get outside, to get help, to get away from the wrongness that was flooding my senses along with the allergic reaction. Robert finally stood up, alarm replacing his usual apathy. "Patricia, something's actually wrong with her. Look at her face." I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. My face had swollen grotesquely, my lips twice their normal size, eyes nearly swollen shut. The welts covered most of my visible skin, angry and raised. "Fine," Patricia snapped. "Call an ambulance. But this better not ruin dinner completely." The next hours were a blur of sirens, emergency room chaos, and an EpiPen stabbed into my thigh. The ER doctor, a tired-looking woman named Dr. Morrison, asked me repeatedly what I'd eaten. I listed everything from dinner while nurses pumped me full of antihistamines and steroids. "This is a severe allergic reaction," Dr. Morrison explained. "Do you have any known allergies?" "Shellfish," I managed through my swollen lips. "But I didn't eat any shellfish." She frowned, checking my chart. "The reaction pattern suggests you ingested something you're allergic to. We'll need to run more tests." Daniel arrived at the hospital in a panic, his face white when he saw me. The swelling had started to go down, but I still looked like I'd been attacked by a swarm of bees. What happened? He gripped my hand carefully, avoiding the fourth line. I started to tell him about dinner, about the strange dressing, about how Vanessa and Patricia had acted, but pain medication was making my thoughts fuzzy. He kissed my forehead gently and promised we'd figure it out. They kept me overnight for observation. Daniel stayed in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside my bed, dozing fitfully. I drifted in and out of medicated sleep, my body exhausted from fighting the reaction. During one of my wakeful periods around 3 a.m, I replayed the evening in my mind with a clarity that sometimes comes in the deep hours of night. The way Patricia had insisted I eat that specific salad. How Vanessa kept watching me with those eager eyes, like she was waiting for something to happen. The strange bitter taste I'd attributed to a new ingredient. A nurse came in to check my vitals, a young man named Marcus who'd been incredibly gentle with me all night. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly, adjusting my confused, I admitted. I've been so careful about my allergies my whole life. I don't understand how this could have happened. Marcus hesitated, then said quietly, "Dr. Morrison ordered a full toxicology screen. That's not standard for a regular allergic reaction. She must have had a reason." His words settled over me like a cold blanket. A toxicology screen meant they were looking for something specific, something that shouldn't have been in my system. The implications made my remaining hives itch even worse. I must have fallen back asleep because the next thing I knew, morning light was filtering through the blinds and Daniel was awake, his hair standing up in all directions, his shirt wrinkled from sleeping in the chair. He looked exhausted and worried and absolutely furious. "I called my parents' house this morning," he said without preamble. "Asked my mom what exactly was in that salad dressing. She got defensive immediately, said I was accusing her of something, then hung up on me. That's not normal," I croaked out. "No, it's not. Elena, I've been thinking about this all night. My family has been horrible to you, I know that. I've been trying to manage it, trying to keep the peace, but this." He gestured at me, at the hospital room, at the evidence of what had happened to my body. "This is different. This is dangerous." Before I could respond, Dr. Morrison entered with a tablet and an expression that made my stomach drop. "Elena, Daniel, I need to speak with you about the test results." She pulled up a chair, and I noticed she closed the door behind her. "We found amoxicillin in your bloodstream. Based on the concentration, you ingested approximately 1,000 milligrams, likely in powder form mixed into food." The room started spinning. Daniel's hand tightened around mine. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I would never take amoxicillin. I'm severely allergic. Everyone knows that." "Exactly." Dr. Morrison's face was grave. "Which is why I've already contacted hospital administration and filed a report. Someone gave you this medication knowing, or at minimum having reason to know, that you're allergic to it. This wasn't an accident, Elena. This was deliberate." Daniel stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You're saying someone tried to kill my wife?" "I'm saying someone administered a substance to her that could have been fatal. If she hadn't gotten emergency treatment when she did, if the anaphylaxis had progressed another few minutes." Dr. Morrison didn't finish the sentence. "She didn't need to." My mind raced backward through every moment of that dinner. The salad dressing that was especially for me. Vanessa's barely concealed anticipation. Patricia's strange calmness when I started reacting. Their resistance to calling 911 until Robert finally intervened. "Oh my God," I breathed. "It was in the salad dressing. They made a special batch just for my portion. Patricia said so. She said she and Vanessa made it especially for me." Daniel's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: disbelief, horror, rage, and finally a cold determination that I'd never seen before. My gentle, conflict-avoiding husband transformed into someone I barely recognized. "We're calling the police," he said flatly. "Right now." Dr. Morrison nodded. "I've already notified hospital security and administration. They're legally required to report this. But yes, you should file a police report directly as well. I'll provide all the medical documentation you need." A victim advocate arrived within the hour, a compassionate woman named Jennifer who explained what would happen next. Police would be called. Statements would be taken. An investigation would be opened. The words felt surreal, like they were happening to someone else. Detective Sarah Chen arrived before noon, professional and thorough. She took my statement while Daniel paced the room like a caged animal. I told her everything: the years of hostility from Vanessa and Patricia, the strange dinner, the specific salad dressing, their behavior during my reaction. "Your medical alert bracelet," Detective Chen noted, examining it. "This clearly states your penicillin allergy. Anyone who knew you would have seen this." Vanessa commented on it once, I remembered suddenly. About a year ago. She asked why I wore such an ugly bracelet. I explained it was medical, that I'm severely allergic to penicillin-based antibiotics. Patricia was right there. They both knew. Detective Chen made detailed notes. "I'll need to speak with your husband's family. We'll be executing a search warrant on their home as well, looking for the source of the amoxicillin." "They're going to deny everything," Daniel said bitterly. My mother is very good at playing the victim. Let them deny it, the detective replied. We have medical evidence. We have witness statements about the special salad dressing. We have your wife's documented allergy that everyone was aware of. Physical evidence is harder to deny than words. After the detective left, Daniel made a phone call that I couldn't quite hear. He stepped into the hallway, his voice low and intense. When he came back, his jaw was set in that way that meant he'd made a decision. I called my grandmother's attorney, he said. Martin Reynolds. He's also a family friend and one of the best lawyers in the state. He's drawing up a restraining order against my parents and Vanessa. And he's recommended a criminal defense attorney for us, just in case they try to spin this somehow. Daniel, the legal fees. I don't care about the money. They tried to kill you, Elena. They tried to kill my wife and then acted like you were being dramatic when you couldn't breathe. I'm done protecting them from consequences. Something in his voice told me this wasn't a temporary anger that would fade. This was a fundamental shift in how he saw his family. The blinders had finally, completely come off. My phone buzzed with a text message. Patricia. My blood turned cold as I read it. We need to talk about what you're planning to tell the doctors. Family matters should stay private. Call me. I showed Daniel, and his expression darkened further. She's trying to intimidate you into silence. That's witness tampering. He immediately forwarded the text to Detective Chen. Another text came through, this time from Vanessa. I hope you're feeling better. These things happen sometimes. No need to make a big deal about it. The casual cruelty of it made me want to throw my phone across the room. These things happen sometimes. She poisoned me and was acting like I'd had a random bout of food poisoning. Daniel took my phone and forwarded that text as well. They're building our case for us, he said with dark satisfaction. Keep them coming. But the text did stop, and I realized someone, probably Robert, had told them to shut up. Too late, though. The damage was done. By early afternoon, I was feeling well enough that the doctors agreed to discharge me with strict instructions and multiple prescriptions. Daniel helped me dress in the spare clothes he'd brought from home. My hands shook as I buttoned my shirt, the full weight of what had happened finally settling over me. They tried to kill me, I said out loud for the first time. Your sister ground up pills and put them in my food, knowing it could kill me. Daniel knelt in front of me, taking my trembling hands in his. I know. And I swear to you, Elena, they will pay for it. Every single one of them who knew, who participated, who helped. They're going to pay. The conviction in his voice should have scared me, but instead it made me feel safe. Protected. For the first time since I'd married into his family, I felt like Daniel was truly on my side without reservation or divided loyalty. We were walking toward the elevator when Patricia, Vanessa, and Robert stepped out of it. The next morning brought clarity along with reduced swelling. Dr. Morrison returned with test results and a grim expression. Elena, we found traces of amoxicillin in your blood work. Are you allergic to penicillin-based antibiotics? My blood turned to ice. Yes. Severely. It's in my medical records. I always wear a medical alert bracelet about it. I held up my wrist, showing her the bracelet I never removed. She examined it, her frown deepening. Someone gave you amoxicillin. Based on the concentration and timing, it was likely ground up and mixed into your food within an hour before your reaction. Daniel's face went from confused to horrified. Are you saying someone poisoned her? I'm saying someone gave her a medication they either didn't know or didn't care she was deathly allergic to. I'm required to report this. The hospital is contacting the police. Before we could process this information, the door to my hospital room slammed open. Patricia stormed in with Vanessa right behind her, both of their faces twisted with rage. You called the hospital administration? Patricia's voice was venomous. They called Robert asking questions about what we served for dinner. How dare you embarrass this family? I was too shocked to respond immediately. Daniel stood up, positioning himself between them and my bed. Mom, Elena almost died. The doctors found. Oh, please, Vanessa interrupted, her voice tripping with contempt. She's being overdramatic as usual. Probably ate something before she came over and is trying to blame us. Patricia moved closer, her finger pointed at me like a weapon. Listen carefully, Elena. If you tell the police anything about our family dinner, you'll regret it. We don't air our private matters to outsiders. My mouth fell open. I almost died. Someone put amoxicillin in my food. I'm allergic. You both know I'm allergic. Something flickered across Vanessa's face. Guilt? Satisfaction? It was gone too quickly to identify. If you go to the police with these ridiculous accusations, Patricia continued, you'll tear this family apart. Daniel will have to choose between his blood family and you. Is that really what you want? The threat hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. Daniel's face had gone very still, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. Get out, he said quietly. Both of you. Patricia laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Oh, Daniel. You're going to take her side? After everything we've done for you? I said get out. Vanessa stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with malice. She's turning you against your own family. Can't you see that? This little victim act is just her way of driving a wedge between us. I found my voice finally, though it came out hoarse and painful. I'm calling the police. Someone tried to kill me. The room went silent. Patricia's face transformed into something ugly and frightening. Before Daniel could react, before I could even flinch, she clenched both fists and punched me hard in the stomach. The pain exploded through my midsection. I doubled over, gasping, the fourth tugging painfully at my arm. Daniel shouted something, but I couldn't hear it over the ringing in my ears. Through the haze of pain, I heard Robert's voice from the doorway. I hadn't even noticed him arrive. Some people just need to learn about family loyalty, he said calmly, as if commenting on the weather. That's when everything changed. The door swung open wider, and I heard new voices. Urgent, authoritative voices. Through my watering eyes, I saw hospital security rushing in, followed by 2 police officers. Daniel had apparently pressed the emergency call button during the confrontation. But more importantly, Daniel had his phone out, and I could see the red recording indicator on the screen. He captured everything. Officers, Daniel said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage, I need to report an assault. An attempted murder. The next hours dissolved into chaos. Patricia, Vanessa, and Robert were escorted out by police. I gave a statement while a nurse checked me for injuries from Patricia's assault. Daniel stood beside me the entire time, his face carved from stone. The police took Daniel's video recording. They interviewed the hospital staff. Dr. Morrison provided detailed medical evidence of the poisoning. And then came the part that made everything click into a devastating picture. Detective Sarah Chen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, returned to my room that evening with new information. Elena, we executed a search warrant at your in-law's home. We found an opened bottle of amoxicillin capsules in Vanessa's purse. The capsules had been opened and partially emptied. We also found traces of the antibiotic powder on a cutting board in the kitchen and in the salad dressing container. The room tilted. Vanessa had actually done it. She deliberately poisoned me. She knew, I whispered. They all knew about my allergy. I told them when Daniel and I first started dating. It's come up dozens of times. Detective Chen nodded grimly. We're aware. We've obtained your medical records and witness statements from family gatherings where your allergy was discussed. This wasn't an accident. We're charging Vanessa with attempted murder. Patricia is being charged with assault and obstruction. Robert's being charged as an accessory after the fact. Daniel made a sound like he'd been punched. I reached for his hand, and he gripped it so tightly it almost hurt. Over the next week, the full scope of what happened emerged through police investigation and legal depositions. The truth was somehow worse than I'd imagined. Vanessa had been planning this for months. She'd obtained the amoxicillin through a friend who worked at a veterinary clinic, thinking it couldn't be traced back to her. She'd ground up the capsules and mixed them into the salad dressing specifically made for my portion. Patricia had known about the plan and actively participated by ensuring I ate the contaminated food and then trying to prevent me from getting help quickly. Their motive? They wanted me gone. Vanessa had convinced Patricia that I was the reason Daniel had become distant from the family. In reality, Daniel had been slowly pulling away because he'd finally started seeing how toxic they were. But they blamed me, and Vanessa decided the solution was to make me disappear. The truly chilling part came from text messages recovered from Vanessa's phone. She texted Patricia the day before the dinner, tomorrow we fix the Elena problem. She'll just seem like she had an accident with her allergy. No one will blame us. Patricia had responded, about time. Daniel deserves better. They genuinely believed they could kill me and get away with it. They thought Daniel would mourn but eventually move on, staying firmly under their control. They'd miscalculated catastrophically. Daniel's revenge wasn't loud or theatrical. It was methodical, legal, and absolutely devastating. First, he hired the best criminal attorney in the state to work with the prosecutor's office. He provided them with years of documentation, text messages from Vanessa showing her hostility toward me, emails from Patricia criticizing our marriage, voicemails where they'd said disturbing things about wanting me out of the picture. Daniel had been saving evidence for years, initially just to prove to himself that he wasn't crazy about their behavior. Now it became the foundation for a prosecution that left no room for reasonable doubt. Second, he sued them in civil court. While criminal charges ground through the system, Daniel filed a massive civil lawsuit for attempted murder, assault, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy. His attorney explained that even if the criminal case somehow failed, the civil case had a lower burden of proof. Third, and perhaps most devastating to Patricia and Robert, Daniel went after their social standing. His parents had built their entire identity around being respected members of their community. Patricia sat on 3 charity boards. Robert was a deacon at their church. They were members of the country club, regulars at town hall meetings, pillars of suburban respectability. Daniel sent copies of the police reports, medical records, and his video recording to every single organization they were involved with. He contacted their church leadership. He reached out to their country club. He informed the boards of directors for Patricia's charities. And he included a detailed letter explaining exactly what his parents and sister had done. The response was swift and brutal. Patricia was asked to resign from all 3 charity boards. The country club revoked their membership. The church asked them to step down from all positions of authority. Their friends stopped calling. Neighbors avoided eye contact. The life they'd carefully constructed collapsed like a house of cards. Robert's employer, a conservative financial firm that prided itself on family values, placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome of the criminal trial. The implication was clear: regardless of the trial's outcome, his career was over. Vanessa lost her job as a pharmaceutical sales representative when her employer discovered she was facing attempted murder charges. Her professional license was suspended pending the criminal case. But Daniel wasn't finished. He'd inherited his grandmother's estate the previous year, a substantial amount that he'd been managing as a trust. Patricia and Robert had been counting on eventually receiving distributions from this trust, as Daniel's grandmother's will had included provisions for them. Daniel's grandmother had been his favorite person in the world, a kind woman who'd always treated me with warmth. Daniel had his attorney file paperwork to restructure the trust. Using a provision in his grandmother's will that allowed for discretionary distributions based on moral character, he eliminated his parents and Vanessa from any future benefits. The money would instead go to domestic violence charities and organizations supporting victims of assault. When Patricia learned about this, she showed up at our apartment screaming. Daniel had anticipated this and had already obtained a restraining order. She was arrested for violation within an hour, adding another charge to her growing collection. The criminal trial began 8 months after the incident. I testified about the dinner, the reaction, the hospital assault. Daniel showed his video recording to the jury, and I watched several jurors visibly recoil when they saw Patricia punch me. Medical experts explain how deliberately administering an allergen to someone with a known severe allergy constituted attempted murder. Those 8 months leading up to the trial had been their own special kind of hell. The restraining order kept Patricia, Vanessa, and Robert physically away from us, but they found other ways to make their presence felt. Patricia hired a public relations consultant to spread her version of events through their social circles. She painted herself as a grieving mother whose son had been brainwashed by his manipulative wife. Several of their longtime friends initially believed her, until Daniel personally met with them and showed them the hospital video. Watching Patricia punch me while I lay helpless in a hospital bed tended to change people's minds quickly. Vanessa created a blog under a fake name, writing elaborate posts about false accusations and vindictive daughters-in-law who destroy families. She never mentioned us by name, but the details were specific enough that anyone who knew us could identify the situation. Daniel's attorney sent a cease and desist letter, and the blog disappeared within days, but screenshots had already circulated. The harassment extended to our jobs. Someone, we could never prove who, but we had our suspicions, called my employer claiming I'd stolen company property. It took 3 days and a thorough investigation to clear my name, 3 days of humiliation while my boss treated me like a potential thief. Daniel's firm received a similar call claiming he'd falsified documents on a major project. His boss, thankfully, knew Daniel well enough to dismiss it immediately, but the intent to damage us was clear. Our landlord received an anonymous letter claiming we were running an illegal business out of our apartment and disturbing neighbors with loud parties. We didn't even know about it until he knocked on our door one evening, letter in hand, apologizing for having to ask but needing to address the complaint. One look at our quiet, orderly apartment told him everything he needed to know. "This is harassment," he'd said, shaking his head. "Someone's got it out for you folks." We'd simply nodded, too exhausted to explain the whole sordid story. Through it all, Detective Chen built her case methodically. The search warrant execution at Patricia and Robert's house had yielded damning evidence. The partially emptied amoxicillin capsules in Vanessa's purse were just the beginning. Forensic analysis found amoxicillin residue on a cutting board that Vanessa had apparently wiped but not thoroughly cleaned. They found it in the empty salad dressing container that Patricia had rinsed but not washed in the dishwasher. More damning were the digital footprints. Vanessa's internet search history showed queries like how much amoxicillin to cause reaction, untraceable ways to give someone medication, and horrifyingly, do allergic reactions show up in autopsies. Her phone's location data placed her at the veterinary clinic where her friend worked 3 days before the dinner. That friend, a veterinary technician named Ashley Parker, initially denied giving Vanessa any medications. But faced with security footage showing Vanessa leaving the clinic with a small bag and phone records showing multiple calls between them that week, Ashley broke down and confessed. She claimed Vanessa told her the amoxicillin was for a sick dog. Ashley lost her job and faced her own criminal charges for illegally distributing controlled medications. The prosecution's case was overwhelming, but Patricia and Robert hired expensive attorneys who tried every trick in the book to discredit the evidence. They argued that Vanessa's search history was taken out of context, that she was researching allergies for a friend. They claimed the amoxicillin in her purse was old, from a prescription she'd never finished years ago. They suggested the residue on the cutting board could have come from anywhere. None of it held up under scrutiny. Vanessa hadn't been prescribed amoxicillin in over 5 years according to pharmacy records. The amoxicillin capsules were traced to a specific batch distributed to veterinary clinics in our area. Vanessa's research searches occurred in the week leading up to the dinner, not randomly months or years before. Robert's text messages provided additional context that destroyed their defensive narrative. In the days after my hospitalization but before the police investigation became serious, Robert had texted Vanessa, "You were supposed to make her sick, not almost kill her. This has gotten out of hand." Vanessa had responded, "She's fine. Stop panicking. No one can prove anything." Robert, "The hospital is asking questions. You need to get rid of everything." Vanessa, "Already done. Mom helped. We're clean." Except they weren't clean. They'd rinsed containers and wiped surfaces, but forensic science doesn't require much material. Microscopic residue was enough. And their text messages showed consciousness of guilt, awareness that what they'd done was wrong and needed to be hidden. The prosecution also brought in several witnesses who'd attended family gatherings over the past 2 years. These people testified about Vanessa and Patricia's open hostility toward me, comments they'd made about wishing I would just go away, discussions about how the family would be better off if Daniel wasn't married. One witness, Patricia's former friend Margaret, delivered particularly devastating testimony. She described a conversation at a charity luncheon where Patricia had said, if Elena had a serious health scare, maybe Daniel would see she's too much trouble and move back home. Margaret had thought it was just bitter talk, the kind of thing unhappy mothers-in-law sometimes say. She'd never imagined Patricia would act on it. But looking back, Margaret testified, tears in her eyes, she was workshopping the idea. Testing it out loud. Seeing if anyone would object strongly enough to stop her. Daniel sat through all of this testimony with his face carefully blank, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. This was his family being exposed for who they truly were, and it was happening in public, on court record, with journalists in the gallery taking notes for news articles. The defense attorneys tried to paint me as the villain, suggesting I'd orchestrated the entire situation to frame my in-laws. It was absurd and insulting, but they had to try something. How exactly had I forced Vanessa to obtain amoxicillin illegally, grind it up, mix it into salad dressing, and serve it to myself? The prosecution tore apart this theory with surgical precision. Dr. Morrison testified about the severity of my reaction and the calculated dose required to cause it. This wasn't accidental contamination, she explained to the jury. The amount of amoxicillin in Elena's system was consistent with 1,000 milligrams, 4 250 milligram capsules, fully dissolved and ingested. That's a deliberate, measured dose. A pharmacologist explained that crushing and mixing amoxicillin into food requires intent and effort. The capsules don't accidentally open and sprinkle themselves into salad dressing. Someone has to break them apart, extract the powder, and mix it thoroughly to disguise the taste. Patricia's attorney tried a different angle during her portion of the trial. Yes, maybe Vanessa had done something terrible, but Patricia was just a mother caught in the middle. She'd only gone to the hospital to check on me. Her reaction in the hospital room was born of stress and fear, not malice. This narrative collapsed when the prosecution played Daniel's video. The jury watched Patricia threaten me, warning me not to go to the police. They heard her tell me I'd regret it if I tore the family apart. And then they watched her punch me, a deliberate act of violence against someone who was injured and helpless in a hospital bed. You'll notice, the prosecutor said, pausing the video at the moment of impact, that Patricia clenched both fists before striking Elena. This wasn't a reflexive slap or an uncontrolled outburst. This was a calculated assault designed to intimidate and harm. The defense had no good answer for that video. They tried to argue Daniel had provoked Patricia by refusing to listen to reason, but the video showed no such provocation. It showed a woman threatening and then assaulting her son's wife while that woman lay recovering from being poisoned. Robert's defense was perhaps the most pathetic. His attorney argued that Robert was a passive participant, a man who'd checked out of family drama years ago and had no real knowledge of what was happening. The family loyalty comment was just an unfortunate phrase, not evidence of involvement. But Robert's text messages told a different story. He'd known what Vanessa was planning. He hadn't stopped her. After the fact, he'd helped try to cover it up. And his comment in the hospital room, delivered calmly while his wife was assaulting me, showed a man who believed family loyalty meant protecting attempted murderers. The prosecution called a forensic psychologist to explain the family dynamics at play. Dr. Rebecca Williams described a pattern of enmeshment and toxic loyalty, where preserving the family unit became more important than basic morality or law. In families like this, Dr. Williams explained, outsiders are seen as threats to the established system. Elena represented change, independence for Daniel, a challenge to the control Patricia and Vanessa had over him. Rather than accept this natural progression, they chose to eliminate the threat. Sitting in that courtroom, listening to my marriage and my near-death experience analyzed in clinical terms, felt surreal. But it also felt validating. For years, I'd wondered if I was overreacting to Patricia and Vanessa's hostility. Now a professional was explaining to a jury that no, I wasn't crazy, the situation was genuinely toxic and dangerous. Daniel testified last, and watching him was painful. He had to admit on the stand that he'd known his family treated me poorly but had minimized it, had asked me to give them more chances, had prioritized keeping the peace over protecting his wife. I thought I could manage it, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I thought if I just kept trying, they'd eventually accept Elena. I was wrong, and my wife almost died because I didn't see how dangerous they'd become. The defense tried to use his testimony against him, suggesting that if the family situation was so bad, why had we kept attending dinners? Why hadn't Daniel cut contact earlier? Because they're my family, Daniel answered simply. I love them. I kept hoping they'd change. And I understand now that hope almost cost me everything that actually matters. During cross-examination, Vanessa's attorney made a critical mistake. He tried to suggest that Vanessa's actions were motivated by love for her brother, a misguided attempt to protect him. Did your sister love you? The attorney asked Daniel. Daniel looked directly at Vanessa for the first time during the trial. I used to think so. Now I understand that what I mistook for love was actually possession. My sister didn't want me to be happy. She wanted me to be hers, under her control. When I chose Elena, when I built a life separate from her, she couldn't accept it. This wasn't love. This was narcissistic injury leading to violence. The courtroom went silent. Vanessa's face flushed red, and for a moment I thought she might stand up and scream. Her attorney quickly moved on, but the damage was done. Vanessa's attorney tried to argue that she hadn't intended to kill me, just make me sick so I'd stop coming to family dinners. The prosecutor destroyed this defense by pointing out that anyone with basic medical knowledge knows severe allergies can be fatal, and Vanessa worked in pharmaceuticals. Patricia's attorney attempted to paint her as a mother protecting her family from false accusations. The jury watched the hospital video where she threatened me, then physically assaulted me. That defense died quickly. Robert's attorney tried to claim he'd simply made an unfortunate comment and wasn't involved in the planning. But text messages showed he'd known about Vanessa's plan and had actively discouraged her from backing out, saying Elena has caused enough problems. The jury deliberated for 3 days. I sat in that courtroom holding Daniel's hand, watching his face as he stared at his family across the aisle. I knew he was mourning the family he'd wanted them to be, not the family they actually were. Vanessa was convicted of attempted murder and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Patricia was convicted of assault, conspiracy, and obstruction, receiving 8 years. Robert was convicted as an accessory and received 5 years. When the verdicts were read, Patricia screamed that Daniel had destroyed the family. Vanessa stared at him with pure hatred. Robert just looked old and defeated. Daniel stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The civil trial was almost anticlimactic after the criminal convictions. The jury awarded us $2.3 million in damages. Not that we'd ever see most of it, Patricia and Robert's assets were limited, and Vanessa had nothing. But it didn't matter. The point was the public judgment, the official record stating that they deliberately tried to harm me. The civil trial revealed financial dimensions to Daniel's revenge that I hadn't fully understood until they played out in court. His attorney had done extensive discovery on Patricia and Robert's finances, and what emerged was a portrait of people who'd overextended themselves to maintain appearances. Their house, which I'd always assumed was paid off, had been refinanced multiple times. They owed more on it than it was worth after years of pulling equity out for Vanessa's business ventures that never succeeded, for country club fees they couldn't afford, for maintaining a lifestyle that looked successful while drowning in debt. Robert's retirement account, which should have been substantial after 30 years at the financial firm, had been raided repeatedly for loans that were never repaid. Patricia's inheritance from her parents had been spent years ago. They lived paycheck to paycheck despite six-figure household income, every dollar already allocated to payments on debts incurred maintaining their facade. The civil judgment would force them to liquidate everything. The house would be sold, probably at a loss in the current market. Robert's remaining retirement funds would be seized. Patricia's jewelry, the one asset they had left, would go to auction. But the most crushing blow came from Daniel's restructuring of his grandmother's trust. The proceedings had happened parallel to the criminal trial, and the judge overseeing the trust had reviewed all the evidence from the criminal case. Daniel's grandmother, Helen Gardner, had been a remarkable woman. She'd built a successful business importing handmade textiles and had died 2 years earlier, leaving behind an estate worth approximately $8 million. Her will had established a trust with Daniel as the primary beneficiary and trustee, but it included provisions for distributions to Patricia, Robert, and Vanessa under certain circumstances. The key phrase in the trust document was beneficiaries of good moral character. Helen had been specific about this, having apparently anticipated that her family might prove unworthy. She'd included detailed language allowing the trustee to remove beneficiaries who engaged in criminal behavior, violence, or actions contrary to the family values she held dear. Daniel's attorney filed a petition to remove Patricia, Robert, and Vanessa from all trust benefits, citing their criminal convictions and moral failings. The trust judge, a stern woman named Judge Elizabeth Hawthorne, reviewed the criminal trial transcripts and evidence. "I've been overseeing trusts for 23 years, Judge Hawthorne said during the hearing, and I've never seen a clearer case for beneficiary removal. Helen Gardner's language anticipated exactly this kind of situation. She wanted her money to support family members who lived with integrity. These respondents attempted murder, assault, and conspiracy. They are the antithesis of what Mrs. Gardner valued. The ruling removed them completely and irrevocably from the trust. That $8 million they'd been counting on to fund their retirement, to pay off their debts, to restore their lifestyle after they got out of prison, gone. Redirected to charities and organizations that actually helped people instead of harming them. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that this was excessive punishment, that they'd already lost everything. Judge Hawthorne was unsympathetic. They attempted to murder a young woman because she threatened their control over a grown man. They showed no remorse, only anger at being caught. Mrs. Gardner's trust is not a reward for being born into a family. It's a privilege extended to those who honor the values she held dear. These respondents have forfeited that privilege through their own choices. The impact of this decision rippled through every aspect of their lives. Robert's employer had been waiting for the criminal trial to conclude before making their final decision on his employment. The trust ruling came down the same week as the criminal convictions. He was terminated immediately, losing not just his salary but also his pension benefits that hadn't yet vested. Patricia's identity had been so wrapped up in being a wealthy matriarch, the charitable society woman, the respected community figure. Watching that identity dissolve in real time was brutal. Her friends abandoned her. Her charity boards didn't just ask her to resign, they scrubbed her name from their websites and donor walls, removing any trace that she'd ever been associated with them. The country club where Patricia and Robert had spent countless hours networking, where they'd hosted Daniel's rehearsal dinner, where they'd celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, they weren't just asked to leave. The club refunded their membership deposit and informed them they were banned from the premises. If they attempted to enter, they'd be arrested for trespassing. Their church, St. Michael's Episcopal, where they'd been members for 30 years, held a special session of the vestry to discuss the situation. The rector, Father Thomas, personally delivered the decision: they were no longer welcome to attend services. Their actions were incompatible with Christian values, and their presence would be disruptive to the community. "We prayed for you," Father Thomas had told them, according to a friend who was there. "We prayed you'd show remorse, that you'd seek redemption. Instead, you've shown only anger and justification. Until you truly repent, you cannot be part of this community." For people whose entire identity was bound up in social standing and community respect, this social death was perhaps more painful than the legal consequences. They'd spent decades building these relationships, cultivating these connections, and it all evaporated in weeks. Vanessa's situation was equally dire. Her career in pharmaceutical sales was over. No company would hire someone convicted of using medications to poison someone. Her professional license was permanently revoked. The apartment she'd been renting evicted her when she couldn't pay rent from jail. Her possessions were put in storage, then auctioned off when she couldn't pay the storage fees. She'd had a boyfriend, a man named Derek, who'd been talking about proposing before all this happened. He broke up with her via a letter to the jail, and Vanessa's response, intercepted and read by jail officials as part of their security screening, showed the depth of her delusion. "She blamed me for ruining her relationship, for turning everyone against her, for destroying her life." No accountability, no recognition that she'd poisoned someone. Just rage at being held responsible. Daniel showed me that letter after it became part of the court record during sentencing. Reading Vanessa's vitriol, her complete inability to accept responsibility, confirmed that we'd made the right choice in pursuing maximum consequences. The sentencing hearing itself was its own form of closure. The judge, a no-nonsense man named Judge Raymond Torres, heard impact statements from both sides. I spoke about the trauma of nearly dying, of being assaulted in a hospital, of the nightmares and hypervigilance that still plagued me. I described checking every food item multiple times, carrying 2 EpiPens everywhere, the panic attacks that hit without warning. Daniel spoke about the betrayal of learning his family valued control over his life more than his happiness or safety. He talked about the grief of losing his family not to death but to their own evil choices. Patricia, Vanessa, and Robert each had the opportunity to speak. Patricia used her time to paint herself as the victim, claiming Daniel had destroyed her family. Vanessa blamed me for seducing Daniel away from his real family. Robert remained mostly silent, looking defeated and old. Judge Torres listened to all of it with an impassive expression. Then he delivered his ruling. "I've presided over many difficult cases in my career," he began. "But few have been as clear-cut as this one. Ms. Elena suffered a near-fatal attack, orchestrated by people who should have protected her, carried out in the sanctuary of a family home. The breach of trust here is profound. Vanessa Thompson, you obtained medication illegally, researched dosing to maximize harm, and deliberately poisoned your brother's wife. Your actions were premeditated, calculated, and malicious. You've shown no remorse, only anger at being caught. I'm sentencing you to 15 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for 10 years. Patricia Thompson, you participated in the planning, ensured the victim consumed the poison, attempted to prevent her from getting medical help, and then physically assaulted her in a hospital while threatening her to remain silent. Your behavior demonstrates a complete disregard for human life and basic decency. I'm sentencing you to 8 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for 5 years. Robert Thompson, you knew what was being planned, did nothing to stop it, and actively participated in the cover-up. Your comment about family loyalty in the hospital room shows you believe loyalty to relatives supersedes basic morality and law. I'm sentencing you to 5 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for 3 years. In addition, I'm recommending all 3 of you be required to attend extensive psychological counseling while incarcerated, and that any parole be conditioned on continued therapy and no contact with the victims. When the bailiffs led them away, Patricia was crying, Vanessa was screaming obscenities, and Robert just looked broken. Daniel watched them go with dry eyes and a jaw set like granite. Daniel's grandmother's house, which had been in the family for 3 generations, was sold to cover legal fees and civil judgments. Patricia had always expected to inherit that house. Watching it go to strangers was another piece of the life she'd lost.